He didn't say a word. He just picked up the stack of $100 bills, every single one of them, and slid them back across the workbench like they were nothing more than junk mail. The billionaire stared at him, jaw-working
Ah,
hands
it
trembling
hurts.
between
Easy now, we're
rage
here to help.
and something that looked a
I need to
lot
check
like
the mobility.
desperation. "My daughter will walk again." The man in the expensive suit let the words hang there heavy and absolute like a contract he expected the universe to sign. "Name your price." Marcus Cole wiped the grease from his hands with a shop rag that had seen better days, looked William Hayes dead in the eye, and said the four words that would change everything. "She's not for sale." What happened next in that garage nobody in Millhaven saw coming. But before we get there, you need to understand something about Marcus, about the kind of man who turns down more money than most people in this town see in 5 years, about the kind of father who spends every night after his daughter goes to sleep building something that might never work for a sister who never got to see it. Have you ever been judged by people who didn't know your story? Have you ever had someone walk into your life and assume everything about you has a price? That's what happened the day William Hayes put $100,000 cash on my workbench. The first thing people noticed about Marcus Cole was his hands. Not his face, not his build, his hands. They were the hands of a man who had spent 20 years solving problems other people gave up on. Calloused at the knuckles, permanently stained with oil that no amount of scrubbing fully removed, scarred along the right thumb from a belt tensioner that slipped back in 2009 and took half an inch of skin with it. They were rough, they were real, and if you watched those hands long enough, you'd notice something strange. They were never still. Even when Marcus was just standing there thinking, his fingers moved like they were always working through a problem nobody else could see. He ran Cole's auto and machine repair out of a converted 2-bay garage on the edge of Millhaven, Ohio. Population around 12,000, depending on who you asked and whether you counted the people who'd left and never came back. It wasn't a glamorous town. It wasn't a dying town either. It was the kind of place that just quietly kept going year after year. Same diner on the corner, same 3 stoplights on Main, same faces at the gas station every morning. The kind of place where people knew your business whether you shared it or not. Marcus had been there his whole life, 35 years old, single, a father. His daughter Emma was 8. She lived with him in the apartment above the garage. 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a kitchen that smelled like motor oil no matter how many candles her grandmother sent at Christmas. Emma didn't mind. She'd grown up with that smell. She thought all homes smelled like that. One time she went to a sleepover at her friend Kayla's house and came back the next morning wrinkling her nose. "Kayla's house smells weird, Daddy, like nothing." Marcus had laughed for the first time in weeks that night. He was the kind of man who didn't talk much unless he had something to say. His employees, just 2 of them, Ray and a 22-year-old kid named Tommy, who was still learning which end of a wrench to hold, had learned early on that when Marcus went quiet, it meant he was thinking, not checked out. He wasn't cold. He wasn't distant. He was just precise. He didn't waste words any more than he wasted parts. That was the thing about Marcus. He didn't waste anything. It was a Tuesday morning in early October when the black Cadillac pulled up. Not a regular car. A Cadillac Escalade ES5, obsidian black custom wheels gleaming like they'd been polished that morning. Tinted windows so dark you couldn't see through them even in full daylight. It pulled into the gravel lot in front of Cole's and sat there for a moment. Engine running, not moving, like whoever was inside was deciding whether this place was actually worth getting out of the car for. Ray was the first to notice. He was elbow deep in a transmission rebuild and looked up when the gravel crunched wrong. Too smooth, too quiet. He looked at the car, looked at Marcus, and said what they were both thinking. "That ain't a Millhaven car." Marcus didn't answer. He was already watching. The rear door opened first. A man stepped out, late 60s, silver-haired, dressed in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than Marcus's truck. He was tall. He had the posture of a man who had spent decades in rooms where everyone else stood a little straighter than necessary. His face was carefully composed, the kind of composure that takes years to perfect, that looks like calm but is actually control. His name, Marcus would learn, was William Hayes, and if you lived anywhere in the state of Ohio, you knew that name. Hayes Industries. Commercial real estate manufacturing contracts the Hayes Foundation, which had donated enough money to the regional hospital system to get 2 wings named after the family. William Hayes was the kind of wealthy that stopped being about money a long time ago and became something else. A kind of weight that bent everything around it. He walked toward the garage with the deliberate step of a man who was accustomed to people moving out of his way. But he stopped before he reached the bay door. He turned back to his car. The second door opened slowly, carefully, and then the wheelchair came down on the gravel. One of those high-end motorized chairs, matte black, clearly custom-fitted, and the young woman in it moved toward the garage without looking at her father, without looking at anyone. She was maybe 29, dark hair pulled back, fine-boned, with a face that would have been striking anywhere, but her expression was somewhere far away. Not sad exactly. More like evacuated, like she had packed up everything valuable inside herself and moved it somewhere safe and sealed the door. She was wearing a gray hoodie, sleeves pulled down over her hands even though it wasn't cold yet. Her posture in the chair was practiced the posture of someone who had spent years learning how to look like they weren't in a wheelchair, which is its own particular kind of exhausting performance. She didn't speak when she came through the bay door. She looked around this garage once briefly the way you look at a waiting room, not really seeing it, just clocking it. Marcus watched her for exactly 3 seconds. Then he looked at William Hayes. "Help you with something." William stepped forward. His jaw was set. There was something working behind his eyes. Grief, maybe, or the thing that grief becomes after enough years when you still haven't fixed it. He reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope and set it on the workbench between them. Thick white, no writing on the outside. "Open it." Marcus didn't move. "Mr. Cole." William's voice was the voice of a man who was not accustomed to repeating himself. "Open it." Marcus wiped his hands on the shop rag. Slow. Then he reached over, opened the envelope, and fanned the contents out on the workbench. $100 bills, bundled. Marcus didn't count them, but he knew what $100,000 looked like from the thickness of it. The garage went quiet. Even Ray had stopped moving. "My daughter requires the use of an exoskeletal mobility device." William let the words settle, each one calibrated. "I've heard you've been building something. I have sources. I don't need to explain my methods." He paused. "I want to acquire it. Whatever you need on top of that figure equipment, materials, a facility upgrade, you'll have it. I want the device in a proper medical environment within 60 days. Marcus looked at the money. Then he looked at the young woman in the wheelchair, still not watching them, her eyes tracing the far wall of the garage like she was reading something written there that only she could see. Then he looked back at William Hayes and he pushed the money across the workbench. Not hard, not dramatic, just pushed it back, like returning something that didn't belong to him. "No." William stared at him. Behind them, Ray exhaled softly through his nose, the sound of a man watching someone either do something incredibly brave or incredibly stupid, and not yet sure which. "Excuse me." William's voice dropped half an octave. It was a quiet kind of dangerous. "I said no." Marcus pulled his cap off, ran a hand through his hair, put it back. "Whatever you heard wrong. There's nothing here for sale." "Mr. Cole." William's composure was cracking at the edges now. "Just slightly. Just enough. I don't think you understand what I'm offering you." "I understand it fine." Marcus's voice was level, unhurried. "And I'm still saying no." The silence stretched. And then, for the first time since she'd come through the door, the young woman in the wheelchair spoke. "Dad," just the one word, but the way she said it, the weight in it. It wasn't a plea. It wasn't embarrassment. It was something older than that. The sound of a person who has watched this scene play out so many times that they've stopped feeling it and started just documenting it. William turned to her, his composure fractured just slightly the way a pane of glass goes right before it gives. "Sophia, stop." She turned the chair slowly to face Marcus directly. Her eyes found his for the first time. Dark brown eyes, intelligent, exhausted. And underneath that exhaustion, something else. Something banked down and tamped hard like embers under wet ash. "I'm sorry." Her voice was clear, steady. "He does this. Shows up places and puts money on things he wants fixed." She glanced at her father without heat, just observation. It's the only tool he knows. William opened his mouth. I want to go. Sophia said it without raising her voice. Sophia, we discussed. I said I want to go. Not loud, not sharp, just final. She turned the chair back toward the door and moved through the bay without another word. William stood there for a moment, his jaw working. Then he looked at Marcus, and for one unguarded second the composed businessman dissolved entirely, and what was underneath was just a father. Tired, scared, holding something he didn't know how to fix. She hasn't walked in 3 years. He said it quietly, like it cost him something to say it out loud. 3 years. Every specialist, every facility, every experimental program in this country, and 2 others. He stopped. And you have something in this garage that might— I don't have anything? Marcus said it clean. Not mean, not cold, just closed. William picked up the envelope from the workbench. He looked at it once, then he tucked it back into his jacket and walked out. The Cadillac was gone in under a minute. Ray waited a full 30 seconds before he spoke. Marcus, don't. 100 grand man. I said don't. Ray shook his head slowly and went back to his transmission. Marcus stood at the edge of the bay door and looked out at the empty gravel lot for a long moment. His fingers were moving again, working through something invisible, and his jaw was tight in the way it got when he was working against himself. Then he turned around, walked to the back of the garage through the door marked private, the one Ray and Tommy never went through, and pulled it shut behind him. The back room was where Marcus lived his other life. It was cluttered in a completely different way from the garage. The garage was organized chaos, parts sorted by system, tools hung in specific places, a logic to every surface, even if it wasn't visible to strangers. The back room was something else, something more like a mind than a workspace. Drawings covered 3 of the 4 walls, some on paper, some on drafting vellum, some on the backs of old invoices. They were technical, but they weren't sterile. There were notes in the margins, corrections, whole sections crossed out and redrawn. A whiteboard on the south wall was covered in force calculations, joint angles, load distributions. In the center of the room, on a steel work table, sat the frame. It was roughly the size and shape of a person's lower body. Articulated joints at the hip, knee, and ankle, each one engineered to replicate natural movement, not just approximate it. Pneumatic actuators, custom fabricated brackets, a control unit mounted to one side, still exposed wiring visible. Not finished. Not close to finished in the way that something is not close to finished when every time you solve one problem it reveals 3 more, and you keep starting over and over until you've lost count of how many versions ago the first version was. Marcus sat down on the stool beside the table and put his hands on his knees and looked at the frame for a long time. He wasn't thinking about the money. He was thinking about a girl named Rachel, his sister. 14 years older than him, born with spina bifida, which meant she'd been in a wheelchair as long as Marcus had been alive. She died 6 years ago, not from the spina bifida, but from the complications that stack up over decades in a body that carries more than its share. She was 43. She'd been one of the sharpest, funniest, most stubbornly alive people Marcus had ever known. And he had started building this thing, this frame, this machine 3 weeks after her funeral, in the depth of a grief that needed somewhere to go. He'd never told anyone that. He told Ray the frame was a project, a mechanical challenge, something he was tinkering with. Ray had accepted that because Ray was a man who understood that some projects weren't really about the thing you were building. The truth was Marcus didn't fully know what he was building it for. Not yet. He knew the mechanics, he knew the engineering. He'd taught himself biomechanics through textbooks and online courses and a lot of failed prototypes. He knew the theory of how a device like this could work, how it could read residual muscle impulse, how it could translate that impulse into controlled movement, how it could take a body that still had intention but had lost the pathways to execute that intention and rebuild those pathways externally. He knew all of that. What he didn't know was what he was going to do with it when he was done. And right now, staring at the frame, he kept seeing something he hadn't expected. He kept seeing Sophia Hayes's eyes. But what nobody in that room knew was that the machine William Hayes wanted to buy, I'd built it with my own grief. 6 years. Every night after my daughter went to sleep. All for a sister who never got to walk. She came back 4 days later, alone this time. No father, no car. She'd taken what looked like a rideshare from somewhere, and she pulled up to the garage in the middle of a Thursday afternoon when Ray and Tommy were both out on a pickup job and Marcus was alone. He was under a lifted F250 when he heard the gravel. He slid out on the creeper, looked at her, and said nothing. She said nothing either for a moment. "I don't want to be here," she said it finally. "I want that to be clear." He sat up, set his ratchet down. "Okay. My father doesn't know I came." "Okay." She looked at the bay door, then back at him. "He means well. He just—" She stopped. "He treats every problem like it's a transaction. Like if he finds the right number, everything gets resolved." Her voice was measured. She'd clearly had this conversation with herself many times. "And I've let him do it for long enough that I don't actually know anymore if I want to get better or if I've just given up." Marcus didn't respond to that. He stood up, moved to the sink, started washing his hands. "I'm not here to ask you to show me whatever you're building." She said it carefully. "I'm here because I need to know why you said no. Not to my father. I get that. I've watched people say no to my father maybe 12 times in my life, and it's always for one of two reasons. Either they don't think the thing works, or they don't want to deal with the liability." She paused. "Which one is it?" Marcus dried his hands, turned to face her. "Neither." Then why he looked at her the way he looked at an engine he was about to diagnose, not at the surface, not at the obvious, but at what was underneath. Direct, unhurried, with the kind of attention that most people had given up on allocating to anything anymore. "Because your father walks in here, puts money on a table, and treats you like a problem to be solved. And the last thing you need is one more person doing that." The garage was very quiet. Sophia stared at him, and for the first time since she'd come through the door, either time, something shifted in her face. Just a fraction, just a hairline crack in the evacuation. "You don't know anything about what I need." "No," he agreed. "I don't." Another silence. "My name's Sophia." "I know. I'm Marcus." "I know." A pause. "Your coffee is terrible, by the way. I can smell it from here." He almost smiled. "Not quite. It's mechanic coffee. It's supposed to be terrible. That's how you know it's working." She looked at the workbench, the half-assembled carburetor, the row of tools, the coffee maker old and scarred that had probably made 10,000 cups over the years. "Can I sit in here just for a while? I don't want anything. I just—" She stopped. And for a moment the practiced distance slipped entirely. And underneath it she was just tired. Just deeply, fundamentally tired. "I'm sick of sitting in places where everyone is watching me to see if I'm okay." Marcus pulled a stool away from the wall and set it near the work area. Not too close, not pointed at her. Just there. "Available. I've got a cooling system to flush. You're welcome to stay." She stayed for 2 hours. He worked. She watched sometimes. Sometimes she looked at her phone. Sometimes she just sat with her eyes closed, and the tightness in her shoulders, the coiled spring readiness that had been in her since the moment she arrived, it loosened degree by degree without either of them saying a word about it. Before she left, she stopped at the door. "You didn't ask me how it happened?" "No, everyone asks. First or second conversation. Always. That's their business, not mine." She looked at him for a moment, then she nodded once. Not like thanks exactly, more like recognition. And she left. She came back the next Tuesday, and the Tuesday after that. And slowly, without either of them naming what was happening, the garage became a place she came when the weight of everything else got too heavy to carry in the usual locations. She didn't always talk. Sometimes she did. About small things first. The traffic on the drive over. Something Emma had apparently told her once through the window of the upstairs apartment. Emma had a habit of leaning out and delivering opinions to strangers, and Sophia had become one of her favorites. Sometimes Sophia talked about heavier things. She told him one afternoon about the accident. A black ice intersection in January 3 years ago. A delivery truck that ran the light. She'd been a physical therapist herself. That was the part that people always found hardest to sit with, and she'd gotten used to watching their faces work around it. She'd spent years helping other people recover from exactly the kind of injury she sustained. She knew the anatomy. She knew the prognosis. She knew every study and every statistical outcome. She knew all of it, and it hadn't helped a single bit. The worst part isn't not walking. I mean, it's not great. A pause. Almost dry. Almost a joke. The worst part is the way it makes people look at you, like you stopped being a full person and became a condition. She looked at her hands. My father loves me. I know that. But every time he walks into a room, I feel like he's walking in to assess the situation, not to see me. She stopped. You don't look at me like that. Marcus set down the socket wrench he was holding. How do I look at you? She thought about it. Like I'm just here. Like it's not a big deal either way. It's not. He said it simply. For most people, it is. Most people make a lot of things into a bigger deal than they need to be. He went back to the bolt he was working. The chair is part of your life. Doesn't mean it's the whole thing. She was quiet for a while. Marcus. Yeah. What's in the back room? He didn't answer right away. He finished the bolt, set the wrench down again, leaned against the truck. Something I've been working on. How long? 6 years. She waited. It's not ready. I'm not asking to use it. I just want to know what it is. Another silence. Longer. His fingers were doing that thing again, working against each other, turning something invisible over and over. It's a mobility frame, external wearable, designed to read residual neuromuscular signal and translate it into assisted movement. He stopped, said the rest of it like he was stating a mechanical fact, designed to help people stand, maybe walk. The air in the garage changed. Sophia's face went through several things in quick succession. Surprise, and then a careful, almost clinical analysis, and then something that she immediately pressed down and sealed. You built that. In here. Been building it. Alone. Yeah. Why haven't you taken it to? Because it's not ready. His voice was still level, but there was something underneath it now. And because every time I get close to thinking it might be, I find 3 more things that could kill someone if they went wrong. And I start over. He looked at her directly. I'm a mechanic, not an engineer, not a doctor. I'm a man who knows how machines work, and I've spent 6 years learning everything else I needed to know, and I still don't know if it's enough. She looked at him for a long time. Let me see it. Sophia. I was a physical therapist for 6 years. I know what assisted mobility devices look like. I know what they're missing, and I know why they fail. Her voice was steady. Let me see it. The garage was silent except for the hum of the fluorescent lights and the distant sound of a truck out on the road. Marcus looked at her, and then he stood up and walked to the door marked private. He pushed it open, and for the first time he let someone else into the room. She didn't say anything for a full minute. She moved through the room slowly, past the drawings on the walls, past the whiteboard covered in calculations, past the stacks of notebooks and the shelves of fabricated components, and stopped at the work table. She looked at the frame for a long time. Then she looked at Marcus. Tell me how it works. So he did. He told her about the sensor array, the surface electromyography patches that would read residual muscle activity in the user's legs. He told her about the control algorithm he'd been refining for 2 years. The way it processed the signal, interpreted intent, and triggered the actuators in sequence to produce a movement pattern that mirrored natural gait as closely as his understanding of biomechanics allowed. He told her about the balance compensation system, the accelerometers and gyroscopes, and the feedback loop that kept the frame from overcorrecting. He told her about the failures, the 3rd prototype that buckled under load, the 5th version that worked but caused pressure sores within an hour of wear, the 7th iteration where he got the gait cycle almost right before the control unit failed under heat. He talked for almost 40 minutes. She listened the way a doctor listens, with complete attention, asking precise questions at precise moments, occasionally asking him to back up and explain a calculation. She looked at the notebooks. She looked at the frame from multiple angles. She asked him about the attachment system, about the load distribution, about how the device handled asymmetrical muscle function. When he finally stopped talking, she sat back. You're not wrong about the mechanics. Her voice was careful now, slow, like someone walking out onto ice and testing every step. There are gaps. The attachment system, the lateral pelvic support specifically, that's going to cause problems under dynamic load. And the EMG calibration process you're describing is going to need to be longer and more individualized than what you've got here. She paused, but the core of it, she stopped again. What? She looked at the frame. Her jaw was tight. Her hands were very still in her lap, so still that it was its own kind of tension. The core of it is better than half the clinical devices I've worked with. She looked up at him. Where did you study biomechanics online courses? Textbooks. Some correspondence with a professor at Ohio State who didn't know I was a mechanic. You taught yourself all of this. I had time and I had a reason. She looked at him. My sister. Just those 2 words. And she understood because she was exactly the kind of person who understood what lived in those 2 words without needing them unpacked. They stayed in the back room for another hour, and when she left that evening she paused in the door the same way she always did. Marcus. Yeah. She looked out at the darkening lot. A long pause. I want to try it. When it's ready. I want to try it. He didn't answer immediately because this was the moment he'd been building toward for 6 years. And now that it was here in the form of one person saying 4 words in a doorway, it was terrifying in a way that no calculation had prepared him for. We're going to need to work through a lot of issues first. Weeks, maybe months. And I'm not making promises. I won't make promises. I know. I've been wrong before. I know that too. His voice was serious. If this doesn't work, if it doesn't, she said, turning to look at him squarely, I'll be exactly where I am now, which I've already survived. A pause. What I can't survive is spending the rest of my life wondering what would have happened if I just tried. The lot was still. A single streetlight buzzed on at the edge of the property. Marcus nodded once. Come back Saturday. We'll start the assessment. She nodded, turned to go. Sophia. She stopped. I'm not promising it works, but I'm promising I won't give up on it. She looked at him for one long moment, and something in her face, that sealed door that carefully maintained emptiness, opened just slightly. Just a crack. Just enough for something to come through. She didn't say anything. She didn't have to. That night upstairs, Emma asked her dad why he looked like he was thinking so hard. Marcus looked down at his 8-year-old daughter and said something simple. I made a promise today. What kind of promise? He thought about it. The kind you have to keep. Emma considered this with the deep seriousness of an 8-year-old who had decided opinions were important. Then you better keep it, Daddy. He pulled her close. Yeah, I better. Outside the garage was dark and locked, but in the back room the frame sat on the work table under the work light Marcus had left burning, waiting the way all unfinished things wait, for the hands willing to keep working, for the moment when almost ready finally becomes enough. Saturday came the way Saturdays in October always did in Millhaven. Gray sky, cold light, the smell of leaf decay drifting in from the tree line behind the lot. Marcus had been in the garage since 6 in the morning, not working on anything, just sitting in the back room with a cup of the terrible coffee, looking at the frame, running through everything that could go wrong. It was a long list. He'd written most of it down in a notebook the night before after Emma went to sleep. Structural failure points, calibration errors, load miscalculations, the attachment system. Sophia had been right about the lateral pelvic support, and he'd been up until midnight reworking the bracket geometry. He wasn't sure it was fixed. He wasn't sure enough things were fixed. He wasn't sure this was ready. And the difference between not ready and almost ready, when the stakes were a person's body felt enormous and uncrossable. And somehow he'd told her to come on Saturday anyway. He heard the tires on the gravel at 9:15. He didn't go to the door. He waited. He heard the ramp lower from the rideshare vehicle, heard the familiar electric hum of her chair, heard the gravel give way to the concrete apron at the garage entrance. Then she was in the bay doorway, and her first words cut through everything. You look like you haven't slept. I slept. How much enough? She looked at him the way she'd looked at patients he imagined, with a kind of professional skepticism that had given up on being polite about it. That means not enough. I was reworking the pelvic support. You were right about the lateral load issue. She rolled forward into the garage. She was wearing the same gray hoodie from the first day, sleeves down. She looked around the bay once, then looked back at him. "Can I see what you changed?" He led her to the back room. She spent 10 minutes examining the modified bracket, asking him about the load angles, the material choice, the attachment points. She didn't touch the frame, but she leaned close and her eyes moved across it the way they'd moved across all those drawings on the walls, precisely missing nothing. "Better," she said it finally. "Not perfect." "I know. The transfer point here," she indicated without touching a spot just above the hip joint. "Under dynamic load, if the user's center of gravity shifts left and the frame compensates right, you're going to get a shear force on this bracket that your current fastener torque spec won't hold." Marcus looked at the point she was describing. He looked at it for a moment and then said something he hadn't said to anyone in 6 years of working on this thing. "Show me what you mean." She did. She walked him through the force diagram with a pen on a piece of paper from his workbench. Clean, quick lines. The biomechanics recalled from years of clinical work with the same ease that Marcus recalled torque specs. She was precise, she was fast, and halfway through the explanation Marcus noticed that she'd stopped looking at him for reactions and was just talking, just working through the problem. Her voice losing that careful, measured quality and becoming something more direct, more alive. He didn't comment on it, he just worked. They spent the whole morning in the back room. Not with the frame, not yet, but with the drawings and the notebooks and 2 more cups of terrible coffee and a pad of paper that filled up with modifications and questions and cross-referenced calculations. Sophia would identify a problem. Marcus would work through the mechanical solution. She would push back on the solution with a clinical consideration. He would adjust. Back and forth for 4 hours until the morning was gone and neither of them had noticed. At one point, Tommy knocked on the private door, something he'd never done before, and his voice came through muffled. "There's a customer asking about brake work on a Silverado." Marcus didn't look up from the notebook. "Tell them Monday." A pause on the other side of the door. "Yes, sir." Sophia looked at him. "You just turned away work. Monday's fine for brake work." "This isn't." She was quiet for a moment. "Marcus, you don't have to." "I know I don't have to. Stop making it into something." She stopped making it into something. At noon, Emma appeared. This was not unusual. On Saturdays, Emma had a loose arrangement with the universe that involved migrating downstairs at some point in the morning and inserting herself into whatever was happening with the calm authority of someone who owned the building. She knocked once on the back room door. Her knock a specific double tap that Marcus recognized, and he opened it. Emma looked at her father. Then she looked at Sophia. Then she looked at the frame on the table. "Is that the machine, Emma? I've seen it through the door before." Emma's voice carried the unapologetic tone of 8-year-olds who have been caught doing something that wasn't technically forbidden. When the door was open a little, "I didn't come in. You've known this whole time. I didn't know what it was. I just knew it was important." She looked at Sophia again with the direct, non-self-conscious curiosity of a child who hadn't yet learned that staring was rude. "Are you the lady from the fancy car?" "She is. Your dad was really mean to your other dad." Sophia's expression flickered. He was trying to help in his way. "My dad helps in his own way, too." Emma delivered this with the philosophical equanimity of someone who had made peace with it a long time ago. "You want a sandwich? I made them. They have mustard." Marcus looked at his daughter. "You made sandwiches. I made them myself." Tommy helped a little. How little he did the knife parts. They ate sandwiches in the back room, Marcus at the stool, Sophia by the work table, Emma perched on the stack of parts boxes she'd dragged from the shelf. The conversation wandered. Emma told Sophia about her school project on the solar system, which she had strong opinions about, specifically regarding the reclassification of Pluto, which she considered a personal injustice. Sophia listened with complete attention and validated every one of Emma's positions on the matter with the gravity they deserved, and Marcus watched the two of them and felt something loosen in his chest that he hadn't known was tight. When Emma went back upstairs, the room was quiet for a moment. "She's wonderful. She has opinions about everything. So did I." At 8. A pause. "It gets knocked out of you a little eventually." Marcus looked at her. "Not all of it." She looked back at him. That small, involuntary something moved across her face again, the thing she was always pressing back down. No, not all of it. That afternoon they started the assessment. Not in the frame. That was weeks away at minimum. What Marcus needed first was data. Sophia's specific neuromuscular profile, the degree and pattern of residual signaling in her lower extremities, the range and quality of any voluntary movement that remained. He explained this to her methodically, and she asked the right questions, and then she sat with the surface EMG sensors adhered to her legs, and they ran readings for 2 hours. It was the most clinical, technical afternoon either of them had spent together. And somehow it was also the most important one because about 40 minutes in, something happened that neither of them expected. Marcus was watching the readout from the sensor array, a laptop screen, old running software he'd adapted from an open-source EMG tool, and he saw a signal. Faint, irregular, but unmistakable. He straightened up, looked at Sophia. "Did you just try to move your left foot?" She looked at him. "What?" "Just now. You thought about it." She was quiet for a second. Yes, I do that sometimes. Habit. I know nothing happens. Something happened." He turned the laptop screen toward her. "Right there. See that spike?" She looked at the readout. Her face went very still. "That's noise. That could be artifact from—" "I've been running these sensors for 4 years, Sophia. I know what artifact looks like." He paused. Didn't oversell it. Didn't let himself. "Try again. Same thing. Just think about moving it." She looked at the screen. She was quiet. Still, the spike came back. Slightly different shape, slightly different amplitude, but present. Clear. Neither of them said anything for a long moment. "It doesn't mean—" she started. "I know what it doesn't mean. I'm not saying it means you're going to walk tomorrow. I'm saying there's signal there. Residual activity, which means—" He stopped, measured what he was about to say. "Which means the machine has something to work with." She looked at the readout for a long time. The spike was still there on the screen, a little mountain range of data proof of something her body had been doing quietly for 3 years that nobody had been looking for in this particular way. Her jaw was working. She pressed her lips together. She looked away from the screen. Don't what? Don't get that look." Her voice was tight, not angry, controlled. The way a person sounds when they are applying enormous pressure to something that is trying to break open. "I've had that look aimed at me by every specialist and every well-meaning person for 3 years. And every time it just—" "Don't make this into hope yet. Let it just be data." Marcus closed the laptop. "Okay. It's just data." A pause. "Thank you." She said it quietly. He nodded, went back to the notes, gave her a minute. She gave herself exactly 1 minute. Then she pulled herself back together. He could see it happen. The composure reassembled piece by piece with the practiced efficiency of long experience. "What do you need for the next session?" "More of the same. I want readings across a full week if possible. Different times of day, different fatigue states. The more complete the profile, the better the calibration. I can come Tuesday and Thursday." "That works." She looked at the closed laptop. "Marcus." "Yeah. The signal. It was real, right?" "You're not—" "It was real." He said it with no hesitation. She nodded once, said nothing. But something had changed in the room, in the air between them, in whatever this thing was that they were building together in this back room that smelled like motor oil and old coffee and 6 years of stubborn private hope. The sealed door in her was still sealed. She hadn't opened it. She wasn't ready to open it. But she'd put her hand on the handle, and that was something. The weeks that followed developed their own rhythm, Tuesdays and Thursdays. Sophia came to the garage. Sometimes Saturday mornings too, when she could get away without her father asking too many questions about where she was spending her time. The sessions were long and technical and exhausting in the way that productive things are exhausting. The kind of tired you feel at the end of the day when you've actually moved something forward instead of just moved. Marcus worked on the frame every night after Emma went to sleep. He was doing things now that he hadn't been able to do before because now he had a specific user, a specific neuromuscular profile, a specific set of parameters to optimize against. The machine was no longer theoretical. It was no longer built for anyone. It was being built for Sophia. Her residual signal patterns were saved in the calibration files. Her joint measurements were in the attachment specifications. Her center of gravity, her muscle asymmetry, her specific gait, compensation patterns from years of wheelchair use. All of it was in the notebook and the frame was changing to meet it. Ray noticed that Marcus was staying up later. He didn't ask directly because that wasn't Ray's way. But one morning he came in early and found Marcus asleep on the stool in the back room, head on the work table, and he quietly put a fresh cup of the terrible coffee beside him and went back out without saying a word, which was as close as Ray came to a declaration of unconditional support. And Sophia, in the third week, started talking. Not about the frame, not about the assessment, but about other things. Real things. The way the garage felt different from anywhere else. She said it like a confession, like she'd been holding it back. She told him about the first month after the accident when she'd been in acute rehab, and the silence of her own body below the waist had been so loud it drowned everything else out. She told him about the day she'd first managed to sit up on her own in the chair and how everyone in the room had cheered, and she'd felt nothing because she was a physical therapist, and she knew exactly what sitting up unassisted meant in the context of her injury, which was that it was the first step of a very long road, and nobody was telling her what was at the other end of it. They kept saying progress. She said it one Thursday evening when the garage was dark outside the bay, and they'd been talking longer than either of them had planned. Every tiny incremental thing was progress, and I understood why they were doing it. Positive reinforcement, motivational framing, all the clinical reasons. But I was a PT. I knew the script. She paused. And knowing the script when you're the one in the chair. It felt like being lied to very kindly, which is almost worse than just being lied to. What would have helped? She thought about it, actually thought about it, which he'd come to recognize. The silence she took when she was giving a question its full due instead of the quick practiced answer. Someone who didn't need me to be okay. Who could just sit with the fact that it wasn't okay and not need to fix that feeling or reframe it or move me toward the next milestone. A pause. Someone who could look at the situation honestly and not flinch. He said nothing. She looked at him. You do that, you know. Do what? Don't flinch. She said it simply, not as a compliment, more as an observation about a thing she'd been trying to understand for weeks. Most people flinch. Doctors, family, friends. They look at me and something in their face does this adjustment where they recalibrate how they're talking to me, how much truth to let through, how upbeat to be. She paused. You don't do that. You look at me the same way you look at everything else in this garage. Like I'm just present, like the situation is what it is, and that's actually fine. Marcus was quiet for a moment. My sister hated the flinch. She used to say it made her feel like a reminder of something, like people saw her and immediately thought of everything they'd been told to be grateful for, and she became a symbol of something instead of just a person. Sophia was very still. Rachel. He'd told her the name, the broad outline, not much more. Yeah. His voice was even calm, the way something is calm because it's carried that weight long enough that the carrying has become just part of the body. She was the one who never needed the flinch worked out. She'd just look at you and wait for you to get over yourself, and eventually you did. Nobody was better at that than she was. She sounds like someone I would have liked. She would have liked you. She had zero patience for people who accepted other people's versions of what they were capable of, and she would have had a lot to say about the way your father handles things. Sophia made a sound that was almost a laugh. Almost. What would she have said? Something unforgettable and probably unprintable. And Sophia did laugh then. Small, brief, but real. A real laugh. The kind that surprises the person doing it. In 5 weeks of knowing each other, it was the first time he'd heard it. He didn't make a thing of it. He went back to his notebook. But the sound stayed in the room a little after she left. The way the heat of an engine stays in the metal long after the ignition's off. A warmth you can still feel when you lay your hand down. Proof that something was running here. Something real and alive. Not long after, in the 9th week, everything changed. It was a Monday morning. Marcus was in the garage at 6, same as always. Tommy wasn't in yet. Ray was working on a Chevy and the far bay radio on low, some classic rock station that Ray claimed helped him think. The Tesla pulled into the lot just after 9. Marcus noticed it because Teslas weren't common in Millhaven, and this one was pristine. Model S Black, the kind of vehicle that announced its owner had made certain choices about how to signal success. The man who stepped out was maybe 50, dressed in an expensive suit, confident in the way that people are confident when they've spent decades being right about things that matter to shareholders. Marcus was under the hood of a Ford when the man walked into the bay. "Mr. Cole." Marcus straightened up, wiped his hands. "Help you with something? I'm Dr. Leonard Cross, CEO of Crosstech Medical." The man extended a hand. Marcus shook it. The grip was firm, practiced. Cross pulled a business card from his jacket, set it on the workbench. "I heard through professional channels you're developing something interesting. An exoskeletal mobility device." Marcus kept his expression neutral. "Who told you that?" Cross smiled the smile of a man who was accustomed to not answering questions he didn't want to answer. "I have researchers who monitor emerging technologies. Your name came up in some technical forums. Correspondence with a professor at Ohio State. A few supply orders that raised flags." He paused. "I'd like to acquire your design. We have regulatory pathways already established. FDA approval, clinical trial infrastructure, manufacturing capability at scale." He named a figure. $250,000, plus royalties on every unit sold. Marcus looked at the business card. Crosstech Medical. Headquarters in Cleveland. He'd heard of them. They made high-end prosthetics, mobility aids devices that insurance companies sometimes covered and sometimes didn't. Not for sale. Cross's smile didn't falter, but something behind his eyes sharpened. "Mr. Cole, I'm offering you a path to help thousands of people. What you're doing here." He looked around the garage at the oil stains, at the tools, at the F-25, with its hood up, is admirable but irresponsible. No FDA approval, no clinical oversight, no liability protection. He paused, let the words settle. "I hope you understand the liability you're taking on. If something goes wrong, if someone gets hurt testing an unapproved medical device." He stopped. "I'd hate to see this garage shut down over regulatory violations." The threat was subtle but clear. Cross left the business card on the workbench. "Call me when you're ready to be realistic." He walked out. The Tesla pulled away quiet as it came. Ray appeared from behind the Chevy. "Who was that trouble?" Marcus picked up the business card, looked at it, set it down. That afternoon, Marcus did what he should have done weeks ago. He researched Crosstech Medical. The company was legitimate. FDA-approved exoskeleton devices, clinical trials showing promising results, safety profiles that met federal standards. But the devices cost $180,000 per unit. Insurance rarely covered them. And the customization options were limited, one-size-fits-most engineering that worked for some patients and failed others. Cross was offering him a path, a legitimate path, money, infrastructure, regulatory approval. But it was Cross's path, not his. Marcus closed the laptop. He looked at the back room door. Then the letter arrived. Ray brought it in just before closing. Plain envelope, return address from First National Bank of Millhaven. Marcus opened it, standing at the workbench. Notice of default. Outstanding balance on commercial mortgage. $45,000. Payment overdue by 60 days. Foreclosure proceedings to begin in 90 days if balance not paid in full. Marcus read it twice. He'd refinanced the garage 5 years ago. Took out equity to buy equipment to fund the early R&D on the frame. He'd been making payments barely, but the last 2 months he'd missed them. Too many late nights, too much focus on the frame, not enough on the business that paid for it. 90 days. He had 90 days to come up with $45,000 or lose everything. The garage, the apartment, the only home Emma had ever known. Ray was watching him from across the bay. Bad news. Marcus folded the letter, put it in his pocket. "Nothing I can't handle." But that night alone in the back room after Emma was asleep, Marcus sat with the letter unfolded on the work table beside the frame and did the math. $45,000. 90 days. The garage brought in maybe $3,500 a month on a good month. After expenses payroll for Ray and Tommy parts utilities, he cleared maybe $800, sometimes less. Even if he worked every job that came through the door, even if he stopped sleeping entirely, he'd be $20,000 short by the deadline. Cross's offer sat in his mind like a stone. $250,000, enough to pay off the mortgage 10 times over, enough to keep the garage, keep the apartment, give Emma stability. All he had to do was sell the design. Walk away from 6 years of work. Let Cross take it to the regulatory pathway, the clinical trials, the manufacturing at scale. Let someone else finish what Rachel's death had started. Marcus looked at the frame. He looked at the letter. He thought about Sophia, about the signal they'd found, about the way her face had changed when she laughed that one time. He thought about Emma upstairs asleep, trusting him to keep the lights on and the roof overhead. He thought about Rachel, and he made a decision. He wasn't selling, not to Cross, not to anyone, which meant he had 90 days to finish the frame, prove it worked, and find another way to save everything. He picked up his phone, texted Sophia. Need to accelerate the timeline. Can you come in tomorrow? Her reply came back in under a minute. What happened? I'll explain tomorrow. 6 a.m. I'll be there. Marcus set the phone down. He looked at the frame, at the letter, at the drawings on the walls. Then he got to work. The sessions changed after that. Not in tone, not in the careful, methodical approach they'd developed over weeks, but in intensity. Marcus worked faster, longer. Sophia matched him. She came in at 6 in the morning, stayed until noon, came back some evenings when she could. They didn't talk about why the timeline had changed. Sophia didn't ask, and Marcus didn't volunteer. But she knew something had shifted. She could see it in the way he moved, the way his jaw was set tighter than before, the way his fingers never stopped working even when he was just standing there thinking. In the 4th week after the letter arrived, Marcus finished the recalibration of the attachment system. He ran the final structural tests on the modified bracket. Load, cycling, dynamic, shear, torsional, flex. It held. He ran them again because holding once wasn't the same as reliably holding. It held again. And on the 3rd round he sat back and looked at the frame and said out loud in the empty back room, to no one, "Okay, Rachel. This is it." He texted Sophia that evening. "I think we're ready to try the fit assessment Thursday if you can." The reply came back in under a minute. Thursday. And then after a brief pause, a second message. "I'm not ready. I'm coming anyway." He looked at those 2 sentences for a moment, set the phone down, picked it up again. "That's enough." He wrote it back. He wasn't sure if he was telling her or himself. Maybe both. Maybe that was the only way any of this had ever moved forward. One person deciding that not ready but coming was sufficient. That showing up to the thing you were afraid of, even half-assembled, even uncertain, was the thing that separated the fixed from the still broken. Thursday morning he was up before 5. He went downstairs, started the coffee, sat in the back room and looked at the frame. Finished now, or as finished as 6 years of work could make it, which was never all the way but far enough. Far enough to try. Far enough to maybe be the thing he'd been building it to be. Emma came downstairs at 7 and found him still sitting there. She looked at him, at the frame, at him again. "Today's the day, isn't it?" Marcus looked at his daughter, 8 years old, standing in the doorway in her pajamas with her hair going in 4 directions and her face completely serious. "Yeah, today's the day." Emma nodded slowly with the weight of someone who understood on some level below words what was at stake. "I'll make breakfast." Emma. "It's okay, Daddy. I know how to use the toaster." She disappeared back upstairs. Marcus sat alone in the back room and waited for 10 o'clock. Outside, the morning moved in the way October mornings in Ohio do. Steady, unhurried, the light coming gray and honest through the single window above the work table, falling across the frame on the table like it had somewhere to be and didn't mind the wait. Sophia arrived at 10:03. Marcus knew the exact time because he'd been watching the clock in the back room since 9:45, and had told himself to stop watching it, and had not stopped watching it. When he heard the gravel, he stood up, looked at the frame one more time, and walked out into the bay. She came through the door and she looked at him, and neither of them said good morning. The pleasantries had dropped somewhere around week 3, which was when they'd both stopped performing the normal social scaffolding and started just getting to work. "How'd you sleep?" "I didn't." She moved past him toward the back room. "How are the structural tests?" "Held through 12 cycles. Dynamic and static both." 12. "I ran more overnight. 22 total. No failure." She stopped at the door of the back room and looked at the frame and was quiet for a moment. Then she said something that carried more weight than the words should have held. "Okay." In the way that meant she'd been going through this conversation in her head all night and was now trying to match the actual moment to the one she'd rehearsed, and the actual moment was refusing to cooperate. "We don't have to do the fit assessment today." She looked at him. "We're doing it today. I'm just saying, Marcus." Her voice was very controlled. "If you give me an out right now, I will take it. So please don't give me one." He closed his mouth, nodded once. "Okay." The fit assessment was not the same as using the device. That was what he'd explained to her twice, and what she understood clinically, and what her body apparently had not communicated to her nervous system. Because from the moment she transferred from the chair to the padded assessment bench he'd built against the wall, a process she handled with the efficient practice transfer technique of someone who'd been doing it for years. Her hands were shaking. She saw him see it. "Don't." "I wasn't going to say anything." "You had a look." "I don't have a look. You have a specific look that means you're about to be careful with me, and I need you to not be careful with me right now. Treat this like a mechanical problem. That's what I need." He picked up the measurement tool. "Left hip first. Hold still." She held still. He worked methodically. Hip measurements, joint angles, limb length ratios, the specific geometry of her lower body that the attachment system needed to conform to. He'd done this on paper from the assessment data they'd collected over weeks. But this was the real thing. Direct contact, actual fitting the machine, meeting the person it had been built for. He talked while he worked, narrating each step, not because she needed him to, but because the sound of a clear technical voice seemed to help them both stay in the mechanical frame of mind rather than the other one. "Lateral pelvic bracket is sitting right. Tell me if you feel any pressure points." "Nothing yet." "Knee joint. I'm going to flex it through range. Tell me when it starts to resist." "There." A pause. "There. Okay. That's the natural end of range, or natural end. It's not the device." "Good." He marked the notebook. They worked for an hour and 40 minutes. He adjusted. She reported he adjusted again. The frame was not on her, not the full assembly, not the active system, just the attachment chassis, the parts that would interface between her body and the machine. And even that was significant. Even that was a thing she had never worn, a thing that no version of her life since the accident had included. At one point she went quiet for longer than usual, and he looked up from the adjustment he was making, and she was staring at the wall, not at anything on the wall. Through it. "Talk to me. I'm fine. You went somewhere else. Come back." She looked at him. Her jaw was tight. "I was just thinking about before, when I used to fit patients for orthotic devices. I would talk them through exactly this process. I knew exactly what to say." A pause. "I knew all the things that were going through their heads, and I had this whole professional script for it. Patient education, expectation management." She stopped. "I hate that I need that script right now." "You don't need the script." "Then what do I need?" He considered. "Set down the measurement tool. Tell me what's actually going through your head right now, not the PT version, the real version." She looked at the ceiling for a moment. He waited. "I'm afraid it's going to work a little, just enough to feel like something. And then it's going to stop, and it's going to be worse than if it had never worked at all, because I'll have something to compare the not working to." She looked at him. "I'm afraid of the specific kind of hope that comes just before the specific kind of devastation, and I've been there before more than once, and I—" She stopped. "You don't want to go back there. I can't go back there." Her voice broke on the last word. Just slightly, just at the edge, and she pressed her lips together and held it. I can't. I've rebuilt myself around not going there. And this, she looked at the frame, this is the door to that place. The room was quiet. Marcus sat down on the stool across from her. Not close, not at a therapeutic distance, just across from her, at the same level. The way you sit with someone when you're going to say something that matters. I'm going to tell you something about this machine. She waited. I've started it over 7 times, 7 full versions. Some of them I scrapped after weeks. One of them I scrapped after 14 months because I found a load distribution flaw that would have fractured someone's pelvis under the wrong conditions. He paused. Every time I started over, I had the same conversation with myself that you're having right now, about whether hope was worth the cost of it going wrong again. What did you decide every time I decided to start over? Not because I was sure it would work, but because I was sure that Rachel would have thought it was worth trying. And that turned out to be enough to keep going. He looked at the frame. It's not a perfect machine, Sophia. I'll never tell you it is. But it's the best I know how to build. And the question isn't whether it's perfect. The question is whether the person in it is willing to be in an imperfect machine and see what it can do. She didn't answer immediately. I spent 6 years on this. Every night after Emma went to sleep. Every weekend, every hour I could find. Not because I was sure, but because not trying wasn't something I could live with. She looked at him for a long time. Why? Why couldn't you live with not trying? He was quiet for a moment. Because of the way Rachel looked at the end. Not sad, not angry. Just... He stopped, found the word. Unlived. Like there were things she'd wanted to do that nobody had ever figured out how to help her do. And by the time she was gone, those things were gone with her. His voice was steady, but underneath it there was something old and settled and heavy. I can't fix that. I can't change what happened. But if I can build something that means somebody else doesn't go out that way, somebody who still has years ahead of them and just needs the right machine. He stopped. Then that's what I'm going to do. Sophia was very still. I'm not your sister. No, you're not. You're someone completely different who gets to have a completely different ending. The silence after that was different from the silences before it. Fuller, like something had been said that was going to take a while to settle, but had definitely finally been said. After a moment, Sophia reached up and touched the edge of the attachment chassis, just her fingertips, just briefly. Finished the assessment. He picked up the measurement tool. They worked for another 40 minutes. By the end of it, every bracket was logged, every dimension confirmed, every contact point mapped. He had everything he needed for the final calibration of the control system. 1 week. Maybe 10 days. Then we try a full fit with the active system. She nodded. She didn't say anything for a moment. And then she said something that told him she understood exactly what was coming. Walk me through what that looks like. The first active session. He did. He explained the process. The EMG patches. First, the calibration run with the system passive, then active engagement at low power incrementally increased. He explained the support structure he was going to rig in the bay. 2 parallel bars, the same setup used in physical rehabilitation for early ambulation, which he was going to fabricate from steel pipe and weld to a floor plate so they wouldn't move under any load. He explained that for the first session, standing upright was the only goal. Not movement, not steps, just standing. And what do I do? You do what you were doing in the EMG sessions. You think about moving, you let your body try. The machine reads the signal and assists the effort. And if the signal isn't strong enough, then we adjust the sensitivity threshold and try again. And if it is strong enough and I still don't, then we find out why, and we adjust for that too. She looked at her hands in her lap. You have an answer for everything. I have a plan for everything. Those aren't the same thing. She almost smiled again. It was closer than the week before, when she transferred back to the chair and was ready to leave. Emma appeared in the doorway of the back room as she apparently always would, with the timing of someone who had some internal antenna for significant moments. Are you coming back Thursday? Emma's voice was matter-of-fact curious. Yes. Are you going to try the machine next time, Emma? It's okay. Sophia looked at Emma. Not next time, but soon. Emma absorbed this. Are you scared? The question sat in the air with the absolute guilelessness that only children achieve. No agenda, no strategy, just the thing itself, asked directly the way adults spend years learning not to ask. Sophia looked at the 8-year-old for a moment, then she said something honest. Yes, a lot. Emma nodded. My dad gets scared too. He just doesn't tell people. Emma. It's true. She was unperturbed. I hear him sometimes at night when he's working in here and he talks to the machine. She looked at Sophia with complete seriousness. He says, okay, let's try again. A lot. Like really a lot. Sophia looked at Marcus. He was looking at his daughter with the expression of a man whose interior life had just been accurately reported to a relative stranger by someone he loved and trusted, which was a specific kind of exposure that had no good response. That's called problem solving. I know. That's what I said. You're not scared. You're problem solving. She looked at Sophia. You'll be okay. My dad is really good at fixing things. Sophia held the 8-year-old's gaze for a moment. Something moved through her face. Not the small hairline crack of before, but something more open, more ungoverned. She blinked it back. I think so too. Her voice was very even. She left 10 minutes later. Marcus stood in the bay door and watched the car until it turned out of the lot and was gone. Then Ray appeared from behind the Silverado he'd been steadily working on all morning in the main bay and said without looking up from the rotor he was holding a simple observation. She's getting better. Marcus turned. Who the woman in the chair? She walks in here different than she did the first time. She doesn't walk in. You know what I mean. Ray set the rotor down. First time I saw her she had all the lights off, like she was just enduring being here. Now she's actually here. He finally looked at Marcus. That's you, man. You did that. She did that. She had a reason to. Ray shook his head. That's you. Marcus didn't answer that. He went back into the back room and sat down and opened the calibration file on the laptop and started the final round of parameter adjustments for the control system. Outside, he could hear Ray working the familiar rhythm of socket and impact driver and the occasional commentary Ray directed at whichever vehicle had the audacity to be difficult. And the afternoon moved forward the way it always did, workday, normal, the garage being a garage. But the frame on the table was not the same frame it had been this morning. It had been measured against a real person now. The dimensions in the CAD file were no longer abstract. They were hers. And the calibration parameters he was setting now were built from 9 weeks of her specific neuromuscular signature, her particular body, the specific and individual way her nervous system spoke in its quiet residual voice that most people had decided wasn't worth listening to. He worked until 7. Then he went upstairs, made dinner pasta, the kind Emma would actually eat, which excluded a range of ingredients she had strong positions on, and sat at the table with his daughter and listened to her tell him about the Pluto project, which had expanded in scope to include a strongly worded letter to the International Astronomical Union that Emma intended to submit through proper channels which she had identified as the website. He helped her with the letter after dinner. It was very good, passionate, factually grounded. It made 3 clear arguments. You should sign it. It's your letter. You helped. As a mechanic, I feel like my position on planetary classification might not carry a lot of weight. Emma considered this. You're very smart, though. Thank you. Sophia thinks so, too. He looked at his daughter. She say that she didn't have to. Emma delivered this with the authority of 8. I can tell. She went back to the letter. She looks at you the same way I look at you. Marcus was quiet for a moment. How's that? Like you're the person who knows how to fix the thing. Emma said it simply. He sat with that for a moment. The weight of it. Not the romantic reading, not the sentimental one, but the real one. The specific gravity of being the person someone has decided to believe in when believing in something has cost them before and might cost them again and they've decided to do it anyway. Finish the letter. You didn't answer. Finish the letter, Emma. She finished the letter. He proofread it. It was submitted to the IAU website at 8:45 with Emma's full name and the return address of Cole's Auto and Machine Repair, Mill Haven, Ohio, in the sender field. She went to bed proud. He went back down to the garage. He finished the calibration in 8 days. Not 10, not 7. 8, which felt like the right number. Not rushed, not prolonged. Just the amount of time the work actually required when you stopped second-guessing every parameter and started trusting what 6 years of building and 9 weeks of data had earned you the right to trust. He ran the final system check on a Wednesday evening, went through every subsystem twice, found one voltage irregularity in the left knee actuator circuit that took him 4 hours to trace to a connector that had developed a hairline crack, replaced it, ran the check again, and at 11:47 he sat back. "That's it." He said it out loud to the empty room. He texted Sophia. "Saturday 10 a.m. We're ready." The reply came back fast, which meant she'd been waiting for it, which meant she hadn't been sleeping either. "I'll be there." Then after a pause, "Is the coffee going to be as bad as usual?" He looked at that for a moment. Worse. Special occasion. He didn't sleep much that night. Not from anxiety exactly. It was something else. Something that didn't have a clean name. The feeling of standing at the end of a very long road and being able to see for the first time that it does, in fact, end somewhere, and that somewhere is close enough to make out the shape of. He lay in the dark and listened to the building settle and thought about Rachel the way he did on the nights that mattered. And he said what he always said to her on those nights, which was quiet and private and not for anybody else. Then he got up at 5 and went downstairs and made the coffee. Ray showed up at 7:30, which was 45 minutes before his shift started, and he didn't explain why. He just came in, poured himself a cup, looked at the closed door of the back room. "Today's the day. Today's the day." Ray nodded, picked up his coffee. "I'll stay out of the way." "I know you will, but I'm going to be right here." Marcus looked at him. Ray was looking at his coffee cup with the expression of a man who had said what he needed to say and was now pretending he hadn't said it. Marcus didn't respond to that because neither of them needed him to. Emma came down at 8, assessed the situation with the accuracy she always brought to significant mornings, and announced that she was going to Kayla's house for the day. Marcus looked at her. "I didn't arrange that. I called Kayla's mom last night. She said it was fine. I figured you'd want the space." She picked up her backpack from the hook by the stairs. Then she stopped and turned back. "Tell Sophia I said good luck." "I will." She looked at him for a moment with those eyes that saw too much. "You're going to be great, Dad." He looked at his daughter, 8 years old, a person so fundamentally decent that sometimes it stopped him cold. This kid he'd raised above a garage with 2 bedrooms and motor oil in the air, who had taught herself more about how to be in the world than most adults he knew. "Get out of here." She grinned and went. Sophia arrived at 10:01. She came through the bay door and Marcus was already in the back room, and she came to the doorway and they looked at each other, and neither of them said anything for a moment. And then she looked at the frame and looked at him. "Show me what you changed." He showed her. He walked her through the final calibration parameters, the connector replacement, the adjusted sensitivity thresholds on the EMG input channels. She asked 4 questions. The questions were precise and he answered them precisely. And when he was done, she sat for a moment and then said the word that meant everything was about to change. "Okay. The bars are rigged in the bay. I welded the floor plate Thursday. Checked the load ratings twice. How wide is the stance shoulder width on you? Based on the assessment data. Adjustable if we need to change it. And the first session is just standing. Just standing. No movement goals, no distance. Just upright with the machine active. And whatever your body decides to do from there is what we work with." She looked at the frame. Her hands were in her lap, very still. "Walk me through the sequence again." He did. He'd done it 3 times over the past 2 weeks. Once in person, twice by phone when she'd called in the evenings, and he'd known without her saying it that she needed to hear the process again, needed to hold the sequence in her mind like a map of a route she was going to have to drive in the dark. He talked her through it now, step by step, the same way every time, because consistency was its own kind of reassurance. She listened with her eyes closed. When he finished, she opened them. "Okay, let's go." The bay was quiet and clean. Ray had swept it that morning, which was not something Ray did voluntarily, and Marcus had noticed and not commented on it. The parallel bars ran north to south down the center of the open bay, 8 feet long, welded solid to a steel floor plate exactly shoulder width for Sophia. The frame hung on its mounting rack beside the bench, fully assembled, charged every system green on the status panel. Sophia transferred to the padded bench. No tremor in her hands this time. Or if there was, she decided not to let it show, which was its own kind of courage. Marcus attached the EMG patches first, same positions as the assessment sessions, and she held still and didn't speak while he worked. Then he brought the frame over. The process of fitting it was practiced now. They'd done the attachment chassis 3 times over the previous weeks, and her body knew the sequence. This bracket at the hip, this cuff at the thigh, this joint aligned at the knee, this connection at the ankle. It took 12 minutes. She told him 1 pressure point at the left knee. Quarter turn of the fit screw. Better. He plugged in the harness connector. The status panel shifted from standby to ready. The system ran its self-check. 4 seconds of quiet humming as each actuator cycled through its range test, and then the green light held. He looked at her. "How do you feel?" She looked down at the device around her legs. Her expression was unreadable in the way that something is unreadable when it is working very hard to contain something too large for a face to hold. Heavy. And she stopped. And real. It feels real, which is different from how I thought it would feel. How'd you think it would feel? Clinical. Medical equipment. She touched the frame lightly with her fingertips. It doesn't feel like that. It feels like something that was actually made. A pause. Made for something. It was. She looked at him. He looked back. No flinch. Same as always. Same as it had been since the first afternoon she'd stayed in the garage because she was tired of being watched. Just present. Just honest. Just 2 people about to try something that mattered. Okay. What do I do? We get you to the bars first. I'm going to support your right side. You tell me if anything feels wrong. Pressure resistance. Anything that doesn't feel right. We stop immediately. No argument, no pushing through it. You say stop, we stop. Understood. And if the system gives you any kind of pain signal, I know what pain signals are. Former PT, remember I remember? He positioned himself at her right side arm, steady at her back. Ready. She took a breath. Ready. The transfer from the bench to standing position was assisted. Him taking weight on the right, the frame supporting the structure on both sides. The process slow and intentional. And then she was at the bars, hands gripping the steel, and she was upright and the frame was active. And for a moment, nothing happened except that Sophia Hayes was standing. Just standing. For the first time in 3 years. She didn't say anything. Her knuckles were white on the bars. Her breathing was audible, not distressed, but present. The breath of someone who was fully inside their body in a way they hadn't been for a long time. She was looking straight ahead at the far wall of the garage, and her jaw was set and her eyes were wide and completely dry. Marcus stood at her right side and said nothing and did not move. He gave her 60 seconds with it. Just that. Just the fact of vertical. Tell me what you're feeling. Quiet, clinical, not making it big. Strange. Tall. A pause. The world looks different from here. I forgot. I forgot how much taller everything was. Her voice was controlled but thin. The system's holding well. No alerts. Actuators are tracking at expected load. I know. I can feel them. I can feel the machine. She stopped. It's not like I expected. Good different or bad different. It's like... She searched for the words. It's like someone put scaffolding around a building that's been leaning. You can feel the support. It's not your own strength, but it's not fighting you either. It's just there, underneath you. Marcus made a note on the tablet he was holding in his left hand. Okay, when you're ready, not yet just when you're ready, I want you to think about your left foot. Same thing we did in the EMG sessions. Just think about it. Don't force it. Let the intention come, and let the machine read it. She was quiet. He waited. I'm thinking about it. He watched the readout on the control unit. The EMG display was live. The same graph he'd been watching for 9 weeks. The same faint signal profile he'd memorized. He watched it and waited. And the spike came. Strong. Stronger than the assessment sessions. Much stronger. The left knee actuator responded. A small smooth extension, maybe 10 degrees. Hold. Return. The system had read the signal and acted on it. And the action had been exactly what the calibration predicted. Sophia made a sound. Not a word, not a cry. A sound that came from somewhere below language. The specific sound of a body recognizing itself doing something it had been told it could no longer do. Again. Her voice was barely there. Did that just... Yes. That was you. Your signal. The machine responded to you. Again. She said it louder. Same thing. Left foot. Whenever you're ready. She tried again. The spike came faster this time. The signal cleaner stronger, like a muscle memory reasserting itself through a pathway that had been quiet, but not dead. The actuator responded. Smoother this time, the movement arc a little wider. Again. Sophia Marcus. He looked at her face. It was fierce and terrified and absolutely alive in a way that he had seen building for weeks and that was now fully present. Every light in the building on. He looked at the control unit. All systems green. Load within parameters. No alerts. Again. The third time she didn't just think about the foot. She tried to step. Not a full step. The system wasn't calibrated for full gait yet, and that wasn't the goal. That wasn't what they'd said. But her body tried. The residual signal fired through both legs in sequence. Left, right, left. The pattern of walking, the pattern her nervous system had stored somewhere deep and unforgotten through 3 years of stillness. And the frame read it, and it responded, and Sophia Hayes's legs moved. Not far, not smoothly. The right side was weaker signal, and the actuator assist was asymmetrical, and she lurched forward slightly against the bars, and Marcus's arm was there immediately at her back, steady, and she caught herself on the bars and stopped. The garage was silent. She was breathing hard. Her arms were shaking on the bars. Her head was down. He didn't speak. He kept his arm at her back, and he waited. It took a moment. When she lifted her head, her face was wet and her eyes were wide, and she looked at him with an expression that was so far beyond words that neither of them made any attempt at words for a very long time. Then she said 2 words that were everything. I moved. You moved. That was me. That was you. She looked down at the frame at her legs, at the floor that was 4 inches closer than it had been from the wheelchair. She looked at her hands on the bars, and she looked at the distance between herself and the end of the parallel bars. And she said very quietly, like a person saying something they have been afraid to think for a very long time, I want to try to walk. He took a breath. Not today. Today was standing. Today was movement. That's more than we planned. I know it's more than we planned. Her voice was still quiet, but there was steel under it now. Marcus. His voice was firm and steady. The system needs to be recalibrated based on what just happened. The right side signal is weaker than we thought, and I need to adjust the assist ratio before we try any sustained gait sequence. Otherwise, you're going to compensate in your upper body, and we'll be dealing with shoulder strain before we even get to walking. He paused. I'm not telling you no. I'm telling you not today because I want today to work, and it is working, and I am not going to let us blow it by going too fast. She was gripping the bars, looking at him, jaw set. Then she exhaled. The tension in her shoulders dropped 2 degrees. How long to recalibrate? I can have the right side assist adjusted before you leave today. Next session? Tuesday. If you can do Tuesday, we start gait sequencing. Tuesday. She said it immediately. Tuesday. She stood at the bars for 40 more minutes, not trying to walk, just standing, letting the system track her, letting the calibration refine against the real-time data of her body's actual signal profile as it warmed up. As the nervous system woke up to the presence of the machine and started communicating with a clarity that the assessment sessions had only hinted at. He watched the readout, and she stood, and neither of them talked much, and the silence was full and clean and good. When they finally sat down, her back in the chair, him on the stool, both of them tired in the specific way of people who have been completely present for a sustained period of time, she said something he needed to hear. "Tell me honestly, what did you see?" The signal is stronger than the assessment data suggested, both sides, but significantly more on the left. The right side is going to need a higher assist ratio, probably for several sessions, until the signal builds. She waited. "The movement pattern your system produced." He stopped looking for the right words. It was correct. The sequence was right. "Your body knows how to walk. It's been knowing this whole time." She looked at him. "Your neuromuscular system never forgot. The injury disrupted the pathway. It didn't erase the memory." He paused. "That's what I've been trying to tell you for 9 weeks, and I didn't say it directly because I didn't want to set an expectation I couldn't back up. But now I've seen the data. I've seen what just happened." He looked at her steadily. "You're going to walk, Sophia. Not because the machine can do it for you, because your body already knows how, and the machine is going to help it remember." She was quiet for a very long time. Outside, somewhere in the parking lot, a bird was making noise. The fluorescent light above the bench buzzed its low note. Normal sounds, regular sounds. The garage being exactly what it always was, imperfect, oil-stained, lit by institutional lighting, not a hospital or a clinic or a facility with a name on a building. Just a garage where something extraordinary had just happened. "I need to call my father." Marcus looked at her. "Not to report. I'm not asking him to come in and take over. I just—" She stopped. "He needs to know that something is happening. He's been carrying this longer than I have in some ways, and it's been eating him alive, and he doesn't know how to say that, and I've been too angry to give him space for it." A pause. "Today feels like the day I stopped punishing him for carrying the wrong way." Marcus said nothing. He just looked at her the way he always did. Straight on. No flinch, no commentary. Just room for whatever she was working through. "Does that make sense?" "Yeah." "It makes sense." She nodded, looked at the frame on its rack. "Marcus." "Yeah, thank you. Not for today specifically, for all of it. For—" She stopped. "For not treating me like a problem." He looked at her for a moment. Then he said something simple and true. "You're not a problem. I know. You're the first person in 3 years who made me actually know that, not just hear it." He stood up, went to the workbench, picked up the calibration tablet. "Come back Tuesday. 8 a.m. 8 a.m. She moved toward the bay door. At the threshold, she stopped as she always did. "Emma's going to want a full report. Emma is going to demand a full report. And detailed testimony." Sophia smiled. Not the almost smile from the first weeks. Not the small, brief, real laugh from that one evening. A full smile, tired and overwhelmed and lit from somewhere deep inside. The smile of a person who has just been handed back something they had stopped letting themselves miss. She went out into the afternoon. Ray appeared from behind the Chevy he'd been working on in the far bay, pointedly, very pointedly, not looking toward the parallel bars or the back room. "Good session. Good session." Ray nodded, went back to work. Marcus stood in the empty bay and looked at the parallel bars and looked at the floor and thought about the 40 minutes Sophia had stood at those bars and the 3 times the machine had answered and the way her face had looked the moment she understood what was happening. He thought about Rachel. "I kept the promise." Then he picked up the calibration tablet, went back to the frame and started adjusting the right side assist ratio for Tuesday. Tuesday came and Sophia walked 5 steps. Thursday she walked 8. The following Tuesday she walked the full length of the bars, fingertips barely touching the steel, and by week 13 she was walking without touching them at all. He didn't make a speech about it. He just watched her walk past the end of the bars, 3 steps beyond them into open floor, and then stop and look back at him with an expression that required no interpretation from any distance. How did that feel? Like something I used to take for granted. Yeah, and neither of them needed to say anything else. But the letter from the bank still sat in the drawer of the workbench. 77 days remaining, $45,000 owed. And Marcus was still $28,000 short, even with every job he'd worked, even with Ray's $8,000 sitting in the account. Cross's business card was still on the workbench too. And on a Sunday evening in week 14, when Marcus was alone in the garage running numbers that didn't add up no matter how many times he ran them, his phone rang. William Hayes. Marcus stared at the name on the screen for 3 rings before he answered. Mr. Cole. William's voice was different than it had been that first day. Quieter, less certain of itself. I hope I'm not interrupting. No. What can I do for you? My daughter told me what's been happening. The sessions. The progress. William paused. I need to talk to you. In person. Are you available tomorrow? What's this about? I'd rather discuss it face to face. Marcus looked at the foreclosure letter in the drawer. 10 a.m. The garage. I'll be there. William arrived at 9:55 in the black Cadillac. This time, when he stepped out, he was alone. No Sophia, no entourage. Just a man in his late 60s carrying the weight of 3 years on his shoulders. He walked into the garage and stopped just inside the bay door. Thank you for seeing me. Marcus nodded, didn't speak. I owe you an apology. William's voice was steady, but there was something raw underneath it. The way I came in here 3 months ago. Money on the table. Treated you like a vendor, my daughter like a product to be fixed. He paused. I've been thinking about that since the day she called me and told me what was happening here. I was wrong. Marcus considered him for a moment. She did the work. I just built the machine. No. Sophia's voice came from the bay door. Marcus turned. She was there in the wheelchair, and the look on her face told him she'd been listening. That's not... She did the work. Marcus said it again steadily. Everything I built is only useful because she was willing to get in it and try. That's hers. I just made sure the machine was ready when she was. William looked at him. Something in the older man's face shifted. Still, I was wrong, and I want to make it right. He paused. I've been thinking about what comes next. Beyond Sophia. There are a lot of people like her. People who've been told some version of you'll never by the right combination of specialists and insurers. Marcus said nothing. I want to help you. Not the way I came in here the first time, not buying it, not acquiring it. William looked at Marcus directly. Partner, proper testing, regulatory pathway, manufacturing at scale. All of it, whatever it takes. My foundation has the infrastructure. You have the thing worth building. What I'm asking is whether you'd let me be part of what comes next. Marcus looked at him for a moment. Then he looked at Sophia. She was watching him with that expression he'd come to know well. Honest and direct and carrying something that was for him specifically that she wasn't trying to hide anymore. I'd need control over the design process. Every iteration, nothing goes to a patient without my sign-off on the engineering. Agreed. And Sophia is part of the clinical development. She's a physical therapist, and she's been inside the device. That perspective doesn't get sidelined when the white coats show up. William glanced at his daughter. She nodded. Agreed. And I keep the garage. This place stays exactly what it is. William looked slightly surprised by that one. Of course, because people like Sophia don't always end up in funded programs. Sometimes they end up in a town like this one with nobody to call, and I want there to always be somewhere they can end up. The garage was very quiet. William Hayes, who had put $100,000 on this workbench 3 months ago and been handed it back, looked at the man who'd handed it back. You have a deal. They shook hands over the same workbench, and then William said something that changed everything else. There's one more thing. Sophia told me you're facing foreclosure on the garage. Marcus went still. That's not... It's my business. If I'm asking you to partner with me on something that requires this facility. William's voice was calm. I'm investing $500,000 in Cole Mobility Systems, LLC. First installment $100,000 today. He pulled a check from his jacket, set it on the workbench. Pay off your mortgage. Keep the garage. Use the rest for operational capital. Marcus looked at the check, at the number written there. This isn't charity. I know, it's an investment, and I expect a return. William's voice carried something Marcus hadn't heard before. Respect. You've built something nobody else could build, And you did it alone in a garage while raising a daughter and running a business. That's not someone I give charity to. That's someone I invest in." Marcus picked up the check. He looked at it for a long moment. Then he looked at Sophia. She was smiling, that full, real smile, the one that meant something had fundamentally changed. And he looked at William. "Okay. Just that. Just the one word. Because sometimes that's all a promise needs to be. It makes you wonder how often we judge people too quickly." Marcus thought it, but didn't say it. He thought about the first day when William had walked in with money and assumptions and the belief that everything had a price. He thought about Sophia, who had been told she'd never walk, and had believed it until someone gave her a reason not to. He thought about Emma upstairs, probably listening through the floor, waiting to hear how this turned out. He thought about Rachel, who never got to see this, but who had given him the reason to start. And he thought about something else. Something he needed to know. "There's a man named Leonard Cross. He runs Crosstech Medical. He's been watching this project. Tried to buy it. Tried to shut it down through OSHA." William's expression darkened. "I know Cross. He called me 2 weeks ago. Tried to convince me you were dangerous. What did you tell him? That I'd seen my daughter walk for the first time in 3 years, and that was all the evidence I needed?" William paused. "Cross is scared. Not of you. Of being wrong. He had a device fail 20 years ago. Patient was hurt. He's spent 2 decades building walls around himself to make sure it never happens again." Marcus absorbed that. Those walls keep patients safe, but they also keep innovation out. That's why we need both. Your innovation and the regulatory pathway, not one or the other. William looked at the frame. "We do this right. We don't just help Sophia. We change what's possible for thousands of people." Marcus nodded slowly. "When do we start?" "Monday. I'll have lawyers draw up the partnership papers. We'll file with the FDA, set up clinical trials, establish manufacturing partnerships." He paused. "But the first prototype stays here, in this garage, where it was built." Marcus looked at him. "Yeah, it does. Have you ever refused to accept? Never is an answer?" Marcus thought about it later that night, after William left, after Sophia left, after Ray went home, and the garage was dark and quiet except for the single light he'd left burning in the back room. He stood there looking at the frame on the work table, the frame that had started as grief and become something else, something that proved a person with the right tools and enough stubborn refusal to quit could change what the world said was impossible. He thought about the question he'd ask if he were telling this story to someone else. Have you ever refused to accept never as an answer? Tell me your story. Because that's what this was. A story about refusing, about building, about showing up every night after your daughter went to sleep and working on something that might never work because the alternative, giving up, just wasn't something you could live with. Emma appeared in the doorway of the back room, pajamas on, hair in 4 directions. "Daddy." "Yeah, sweetheart. Did it work out?" He looked at his daughter. "Yeah, it worked out." "Good." She yawned. "I told you. You're really good at fixing things." She went back upstairs. Marcus stood alone in the back room and looked at the frame and said one more thing to Rachel, quiet, private, just between them. "We did it. And this is just the beginning." Then he turned off the light and went upstairs and went to sleep, because tomorrow the garage would open at 7 and there would be engines to fix and a town that kept quietly going and a daughter who had opinions about the solar system and a promise already made to the next version of this work that was only just beginning. And Marcus Cole, mechanic, single father, the man who pushed the money back, had never once in his life needed more than a reason to keep going. He had plenty of reasons now. That was enough. That had always been enough.